welcome back to the final session of this year's virtual summit. I hope you've enjoyed today, and for people that have been on throughout all of our sessions today, then look, we're nearly there. It's the last session of this afternoon.
We have the graveyard shift.
We are a bit ahead of schedule, so look, we're keen to crack on, and hopefully we can finish today's event with a really important session where we actually look at transforming the construction industry with digital competence. My name's Nathan Brownsword. For those of you who have joined just this afternoon, I know I've been in and out for most of the day, as is with a live event, but I'm joined by my colleague Richard White, who's a senior consultant here at Man and Machine. What we are going to do is we will disappear very shortly after initial introductions, but I think first and foremost we'll just to give it a little bit of a precursor in terms of what we're going to be discussing today, but also more importantly just who your speakers are. So if we do disappear, don't worry, it's just to make sure that we can show you all of the slides that we put together and actually cover quite a lot of content that we have planned. I'll go first. I'm Nathan Brownsword, like I mentioned just a minute ago, but I'm the sales director here at Man and Machine. I've been with the organisation for 7 years, and in terms of talking about BIM, I'll probably get told off by Richard in a second, but talk about BIM or digital transformation, that's something that I've really enjoyed actually talking to organisations about their challenges and maybe the pitfalls or where they've gone wrong or what they're trying to do, and I've done that for the best part of my career here at Man and Machine. And I'm joined by, I would say, much more of the expert from a technical point of view with Richard. I'll let you give you.
Thank you for that gracious introduction. As Nathan well knows, I hate the term expert, especially in the construction industry. We all are learning. Any time that anytime new technology comes out or new processes or new standards, we're always learning. So I kind of use that term expert with a little bit of tentative nature, because although I mainly try to keep on top of all of those things, everybody is still learning. I am one of the senior BIM consultants for Man and Machine. I'm one of the BIM Ready program leaders for the Man and Machine UK team, as well as involved with a lot of different parts of industry, from industry specialisms and those kind of things. So I think what we'll do is we'll finalise some of these introductions between myself and Nathan just now. We'll jump off camera and start our little presentation.
Talking about digital competency is really important in terms of what both Rich and I do day to day, and the rest of the team at Man and Machine as well. It's also something that I think we both have a real interest in terms of actually trying to help organisations that have maybe tried but failed or are trying to actually get themselves where they need to be. There's a lot of pressures that go on within the UK, globally. I mean, some of them are mandated, others are just issues that arrive, which we're going to cover. But let's begin. So we've done introductions already. Both myself and Richard's joining for the session. I know whilst Richard is very modest in the sense that he says he's not an expert, he's certainly someone that I go to in terms of his understanding around BIM and digital ways of working.
And needless to say, I not only have one hat as a few other people within the organisation. Obviously you may have seen Phil Reed this morning talking about our Building Smart Professional Certification Scheme. I'm very heavily involved in that programme too, so I do a lot of work alongside Building Smart as one of their UK and Ireland education programme leads, as well as being part of the International Steering Committee for upskilling. And then I've also got a third hat, as it were, looking at the upskilling programmes for NEMA themselves.
For anyone that doesn't know who NEMA are, they're formerly the UK BIM Alliance, so they've gone through a rebrand, and I know that was covered an awful lot last week, especially when I was at Digital Construction or Digital Construction Week. You could see the new logo on their stage or on their stand, with plenty of people talking to them.
Giving out lots of shiny new badges.
Yes, that's it. So there's definitely an awareness piece going on. So just to really start things, so we spoke about, or before we started the session, there was a short video that was created by Autodesk and actually released only a few weeks ago. It looked at the state of design and make globally, and actually it's a 55-page study that started to actually understand not only like the thoughts and the feelings within construction, but also looking at other verticals like manufacturing, media entertainment. And I think that what they concluded in terms of when they were speaking to customers and talking to these organisations is there's three main takeaways, as you probably saw in the video. One of them being sustainability, another one being digitisation and kind of change within an organisation, and also looking for or struggling to find skilled workforce and labour. I mean, these are all three issues that kind of resonate with any organisation. It's a really interesting study. I've had a good read of the report myself. If you want to actually have a look, it's a free download on Autodesk website. If you go to autodesk.co.uk and type in State of Design and Make, you'll be able to find that report that's been published, and it's really interesting to have a look at maybe some synergies in terms of what you share within your organisation or across your projects and different contractors. So, I've touched on some of the pressures, the industry pressures at the moment. I mean, we don't have to go too far in truth to actually to see some of the issues or to see some of the pressures that are being put on organisations. Rich and I were talking off screen earlier about AI, artificial intelligence. It's made the news an awful lot over the last few weeks, probably for bad reasons, or probably in terms of there's more fear there in terms of actually what's been created. I must admit, when I first thought about or heard about AI within construction, I thought it was a bit of a gimmick, really, and I didn't really anticipate, probably like everyone else, just how far this technology would come or the power that it can provide. Ultimately, I know Rich is going to talk about this or touch on this later on, but there is, I think ultimately there is an opportunity to use it, to harness the information, to harness that technology to actually better understand our projects, and also in that early stage design piece, which Mitch actually covered earlier on today, looking at Forma. You can look at other pressures as well. Sustainability we touched on. If you look at off-site fabrication, I mean, that's quite a big thing at the moment. Again, it's in the news recently. There's always been an issue with home builders in terms of quality of build and actually guaranteeing that. If you can create something within a big factory, stick on the back of a lorry, get your skilled workforce all in one place, you can ultimately guarantee a level of work that unfortunately doesn't always tend to happen when out on site. You can also actually then start to then predict costs or make sure that you're staying within those budgets. You're actually delivering the project to its time scale. And I think a big thing is that we've seen over the last couple of weeks is the news that Legal and General are actually discontinuing the facility, or they're not pushing ahead with their factory. Now, ultimately, I know that spells bad news for off-site fabrication, but certainly I think that's more a case of what's going on in the world and the climate that we're in. There's a bit of uncertainty at the moment, but it's certainly the way that I feel that other organisations that we're helping are going, and we're seeing them successfully do that. In terms of other areas as well, now there's obviously one that sticks out in terms of BIM, building information modelling, BIM. Rich is really going to tell me off for it if I keep saying this term, but digital ways of working, I think that that's starting to really seep through. And if we look at that in particular in terms of actually, well, what's going on in the UK at the moment or within the construction industry? It's been around for a long, long time. There's a lot of misconceptions in terms of the understanding of that term. I'm not going to say it again. And also there's now things that are starting to happen with what you saw on my last slide, with Grenfell, the Hackett's report, using digital processes for buildings over 6 stories high, having that mandated or talking about that anyway. But then you start to see things like golden thread that feeds into Building Safety Act. There's a whole range of different pressures that are starting to come into the industry, and as that starts to happen, organisations are going to and will start to standardise and unify the way that they work. They're not going to start working in different ways from project to another, ultimately if this is to their benefit. So there's a lot of pressure going on at this moment in time. And I think what's really interesting is actually when we speak to customers, the common questions and thoughts that we have, I mean, they really do range in terms of actually what they need to do. Oh, it's just 3D models. It's a bit more than that. That is certainly part of, it can be part, I mean, there's an argument to say it's not just 3D models, it's information management or the information behind models, but there's actually the process part, and I think that's something that's quite often missed and something that we're going to explore in a bit of detail. What I'd always say though is it's important that we look at things holistically. I know I'm going to come onto that very shortly, but there are so many different issues that our customers and other organisations are starting to see, and I think it all points back to one aspect of just understanding. And I think that's probably a theme we're going to talk through for the rest of this afternoon that we're with you. So, where does this really go? What problems does this actually start to pose? Now, Rich is going to expand on these, no doubt, but for me, I feel that there's certain things that can just be avoided by implementing best practice, by harnessing technology, and it can even be down to finding information, finding files, working off the latest model, making sure that issues, problems, just basic communication actually takes place across a project. You can do these through what we often approach things in terms of standardization. I mean, there's a whole host of different things here in terms of that we talk about or that we see, but they're typical business issues. And I think if you're having these, then it's not uncommon, but it's always best to look at this in a kind of a wider scope. And at that point, I'll probably ask for Richard,
most definitely.
What your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, we often have conversations with a wide-ranging set of customers that we deal with, from design houses through specialists, main and sort of secondary contractors. A lot of clients that we do talk to are still going through that upskilling piece and trying to understand actually what are the requirements that are being put on them. And a lot of the things you can see on screen right now resonate quite closely with the majority of the businesses that are going through that digitization piece, that move from an analog space into a more digital environment. And surprisingly, we've been in the world of information management and BIM deliverables for a number of years now, with the original mandate coming into force in 2016, and actually prior to that, the developments of the modern view of digital construction back in sort of early 2010. That's coming up to sort of 23, 24, 25 years of development over that period of time, and then in the last sort of 10 years we've really ramped that up moving forward. So when we're looking at these issues with things like data management and information recovery, storage of data, we can be more efficient with the tools that we have. We have heard and spoke to countless organisations trying to find drawings and documents on their servers that have been buried by people who quite clearly think they're putting them into safe location, but that safe location is only safe to them and not in the rest of the organisation. So, current statistics is that the average employee can take 19% of their working week to just finding information. Well, that's just mad. Well, if we've got that information at the palm of our, in the palm of our hand, we can then deliver a much more efficient and cohesive output. So we want to make sure that these things don't go missing. We often talk to organisations about the bidding process, making sure that they are up to date and have the right methodologies for delivering and managing their tendering procedures. We have organisations on the flip side of that come to us and say, we've just won this job, but we don't actually know what we're delivering, because we've agreed to something that was outside of really our scope of works, but we really wanted to go for it. So we just kind of claimed that we knew what we were doing. And this is the point where we need to make sure that we can improve those skills before we all of a sudden are exposed for not actually knowing what we need to do. Timescales and budgets are always tight. We need to leverage those teams and skills within the organisation for best effect to make sure that we can meet those tighter timescales. When we look at some of the government targets that were set out in Construction 2025 paper, reducing the overall delivery programmes of government-funded projects by 50%. That's an unbelievable amount of time to try and save and collate as part of those projects. So we want to make sure that we are using the best skills and tools at our hands to be able to try to meet some of those targets. When it comes to standardization across the industry, we now have a really sort of robust mechanism for being able to look at the way that delivery teams and information is being delivered. We're trying to break down those barriers between design disciplines, between companies, to make sure that we have those efficiencies gained by not trying to reinvent the wheel each time we do a new project. When we're understanding what's in front of us and we're receiving information from other teams, if it's in a format or within a workflow that we understand, then we don't have to spend that extra time to try to decipher the minute detail of what we're actually looking at. And actually, for me, the crux of all of this comes down to digital knowledge and expertise. I myself was in the situation in previous companies where I was sitting as, the term that I don't like, the expert in the room, and being relied upon to be able to provide information for tenders, coordinate teams across multiple disciplines, and the more projects you get for an individual to manage those processes, it becomes like wading through treacle sometimes, because you are dealing with lots of different individuals who have different agendas, lots of different processes that you need to adhere to with different clients. And for me, it's all about spreading that knowledge. The more people within your organisation who have an understanding of what the pressures are, what the needs are of the industry, then we can disseminate those tasks across the teams to improve the way that we work. So we need to move away from these issues at the core, and this often leads back to a process of digital transformation within an organisation and upskilling that workforce. When we're looking at that sort of digital transformation piece, it affects everybody. When we're looking at an entire project, it affects all team members, all project stakeholders within that environment. Everything from the client environment and the project owner and the facilities managers who are going to be living and breathing those buildings for years and years to come, through each one of those design specialists, project planners, construction companies, and even now we're starting to see, as Nathan talked about yesterday, the elements that we're bringing in around specialisms, specialist design teams, manufacturing teams, building product manufacturers. They're all becoming part of this bigger picture. So we need a cross-industry approach to gain the most benefit from this process and improve the way that we're managing this information. Essentially, we are all information managers, so why shouldn't we be embracing this process? Now, we've gone through the industry as a whole has been, in my own experience, tends to be quite slow on the uptake. Construction industry generally doesn't like change, and this can be this is evident from when you look at graphs like you can see on screen here around the productivity by sector, and the construction sector is clearly way below the curve of other services industries within the UK. When we start to look at the manufacturing industry and that productivity gap that sits between construction and manufacturing, that is an industry that very much embraced change. It embraced automation, robotics, generative design, and utilising the technologies at their hands to improve the way that they can work and become more efficient. And actually, I think that construction now is realising that this is really important to the industry, and we have this technology in the palm of our hand to be able to transform the way that we can work and become more efficient over this timescale. So when we're talking about digital competency, we're actually looking at this a wider combination of skills, as well as the change in a business, in an organisation, within a discipline, to be able to perform tasks more efficiently, solve problems, communicate more efficiently, and all of these kind of things that we can see on the screen where we have influences from the outside that are pushing us all in this direction. We should be looking to embrace these technologies and embrace these changes, to look at the tools that are rapidly growing, looking at influencing the next generation of construction professionals. It's interesting, when I look back at my time in university, and that was a fair few years ago now, when I did my architectural technology degree, there was actually no course content around CAD or even any kind of 3D or 2D modelling environment. And I thought that was bonkers, and it wasn't all that long ago. I like to think, at least. Like Nathan giggling at me across the room. So I took it on myself to try to push our course leaders to say, well, actually, AutoCAD at this point in time, it was actually the norm. Why as students are we not educating? Why are we not being educated to be able to have those skills moving forward? And thankfully now that I can see, just last week I was with a customer, and there was a student who had recently joined an organisation. He'd been with the company for 4 months, and the course that he had done was illustrating that need to come into an industry which is technologically advanced, and be able to use the skills that they are now displaying within university courses for using things like Revit and generative design and managing data better, and all of these kind of things that we're teaching our new construction professionals to do, but they're very much moving into an industry that is lagging behind that curve. So there is a massive need for this change. So we need to find ways of influencing what's happening. The other thing that I need to raise here is we often get some confusion over digital terms. The three you can see on the screen have similar meanings but have different connotations. When we're dealing with digitisation that Nathan mentioned earlier, we're actually talking about this process of converting products or services from an analogue process to digital processes. And actually, we still find there are a lot of organisations who are going, oh, we need to do AutoCAD 2D training. And we're going, wow, well, we thought this was something that we would move past, but there is still that requirement and need for the 2D space and moving those analogue processes, not just drawing, but also documentation and management of paper into that digital space. We can move through that into digitalisation, so creating those processes creating automated processes within those digital environments. So leveraging those technologies that we may already have in play to improve and enhance the way that we deliver those outputs. For me, where we want to get to is this digital transformation piece. This is restructuring businesses. I talk a lot to organisations about this, the factors of change, and the fact that change within the industry comes from within. And organisations need to consider not separating out a project which has been done in the same way for the last 10, 15, 20 years, but changing the way that all projects should be delivered to embrace this digital change. So restructuring businesses to integrate that digital approach through data, through applications, through technology, through education, is also a massive part of this digital process. And this is actually where the crux of our UK targets have been based, for uplifting our teams from initially delivering things like BIM Level 2, and then beyond this term into the approach that we should be all attaching to any project, including information mandates, the UK BIM framework, standards, guidance, and the general delivery of these kind of outputs. So we're being pushed down these routes. We're being forced down a guided path that we know should be better for the industry, but we seem to be quite resistant to that. I'll raise things like the UK information mandate. So back in 2021, which seems a very short period of time ago, but actually now this is more than almost 2 years ago, the UK government launched the update to what was the BIM mandate of 2016. Within Transforming Infrastructure Performance Roadmap to 2030 document, which is a nice short title. I kind of wish they made them shorter, but these things do happen. The government launched the UK Information Mandate. This reaffirmed the need for centrally funded government projects and arm's length bodies to adhere to a set of rules with regard to digital engagement on project deliverables. This document is freely available through the government websites, and I would highly recommend going to have a look at this. Within Appendix B of this document, it contains the mandate guidance, as well as some key factors around what should be followed with regard to those types of projects. And what we're finding now is that a number of organisations outside of that core framework that may not be structured in, or may not be receiving money from central government bodies, the likes of retail sector, commercial sectors, are now actually also realising and understanding the fact that these processes are very beneficial to all parties within that team. And there are a lot of commercial clients now that are trying to leverage these processes to make sure that we're doing things in a much more efficient manner. So putting together things like information requirements to support the whole asset life cycle, understanding that we need to address health and safety and security approaches for delivery of these processes. And actually we have a set of standards that we can follow that help guide and steer the way that we deliver and manage our projects moving forward through things like the UK BIM framework. So looking at that whole life approach is part and parcel of this wider aspect of delivering our projects as a whole, and each one of us within that stakeholder arrangement has a part to play in understanding what your role is and what your responsibilities are outside of this realm. For those of you who have been involved or have seen the information that comes around from the UK BIM framework, this is an evolving package of standards. This changes on a frequent-ish basis, and actually this suite of standards will indeed grow as we move through further needs and requirements. It focuses on the gathering of a number of international standards and British standards that allows for direction for each of the delivery teams throughout the life cycle of a project to follow and help to standardise. What you'll notice in here is we've actually still got some of the legacy PAS 1192 documentation, actually one left in here, which I'll touch on shortly. But these have been slowly replaced over a number of years from 2018 onwards. It doesn't currently include some of the wider aspects of this. In the discussions we've been having with the teams in NEMA and Building Smart and those kind of government supporting or industry supporting agencies, with the likelihood is we're going to start to see the needs for things like interoperability and IFC integration into the UK BIM framework in the probably not too distant future. Alongside that, the likes of NEMA and BSI also provide a number of different supporting documentation that help organisations understand the content of these standards. Up at the top of this diagram you can see here we have guidance pieces of documentation which are available free of charge through the UK BIM framework to help support organisations understand the needs and requirements that sit within these standards. And down the bottom of this table we also have some broken out concepts around particular elements that may also be useful for particular industries or individuals to understand maybe the CDE workflows, common data environments, or tendering and appointment processes, or even just planning your information better. So there are a number of teams who are working in the background to help the industry do this upskilling process, and not only through talking to industry experts and industry specialists within these kind of teams or within your organisations, but there's a lot of work going on in the background to help provide that supporting information. From a client-driven point of view, the UK Construction Playbook was launched back in 2020. It's recently been updated in September 2022, and this sets out some of the core guidance behind government-funded projects. Sets out focus areas to improve better, faster and greener project delivery, and that green agenda actually is now playing a really big part when we start to talk about sustainability, which we'll come on to shortly. It also sets in place any sort of the expectations for anybody working on government projects. So if you need to follow particular capability and competency expectations, then this is one of these documents that sets out the set of guidance around those processes. When we're looking at these, it also touches on elements that Nathan mentioned right at the start of here. So modern methods of construction will pick up anything from our digitisation piece to off-site construction and efficient building processes. We're also talking very much within this document around the way that we deal with people and governance, effective working and communication processes through tender and awarding of contracts, as well as building successful relationships and frameworks between different teams. So again, this document is available through the HM Government website. It's a useful read to be able to understand what the central government bodies are trying to achieve from the public works contracts, so that you're aware of what you may be asked for in the future. Then I skipped one too many there. Then we move on to the bigger piece around legislation. We're now seeing the evolution or the next stages of the golden thread of information building in from the Hackett report that Nathan mentioned at the start. This suite of better information management processes need to be driven by a set of government legislations, and we're now actually seeing parts of this appear within the projects that we work upon. When we started to deal with the likes of the Fire Safety Act, we need to address the need for better information management for construction projects, and this has actually resulted in the generation of a new slightly controversial standard, BS 8644, which standardises some of the recommendations around how to manage and present fire safety information as part of that handover process. We have a new term that's been generated from this. We have a new set of information exchange requirements called FIRE, which is a questionable title, but that's the decision we went for. So moving forward with that, it kind of runs in a parallel with things like COBE, with the Construction Operations Building Information Exchange. This is very much focused around that fire information. So the likelihood is we're going to start to see some of these elements appearing in your projects, appearing in your exchange information requirements, to ensure that the data that is being produced on the material content of those construction materials that we're pushing through, both from a design perspective and also from a manufacturing perspective. We also have the launch of the Building Safety Act. So Building Safety Act in 2022 last year has provided a much more stringent regulatory regime on maintaining the golden thread of information for more specifically any type of health and safety delivery requirements around the management and production of construction projects. This is really embedding that need for the golden thread of information through the exchange of information and its life cycle. And this is one way that we can now see the realisation of the term BIM and digital construction being embedded into the must-do attitude of the construction industry as a whole.
I think just on that point as well, so Rich mentioned something just on the slide before in terms of the controversial or the just how much has been hitting the news really in terms of just the questions that have been asked in terms of the guidance or the standards that are coming out, and actually that requirement for information. A lot of that stems back to, as Richard mentioned yesterday when I was talking about BIM for manufacturing. I think that ultimately that this is going to push through the supply chain, and as this information becomes really more available, or whether these standards or these these ways of working become standardised, I think it will start to mean that actually you are able to use some of this technology as a byproduct of actually just some of the stipulations that have been put in place. It's quite an interesting one, and I know that sorry to cut across the pitch, but I think it's something that's really important at the moment. Actually, when you talk about the technology part, some of the technology isn't going to work; it will fall over unless you have that information there. And I think something like this actually coming in, whether it's disputed or not, will actually drive that change as well.
Oh no, I completely agree with you, Nathan, and appreciate that each team member within our team have sort of different exposure to different clients, and especially even the likes of manufacturing teams, cladding companies, cladding designers. This is hitting them hard and hitting them fast. and it's something that they now need to conform to and follow, and it's part of the new rules of construction, I guess.
Yeah. It's just a shame typically that it does take something like a big tragedy and something as horrific as Grenfell to happen for us to be in a situation. But I think it's the way of the world. If you look at just, it normally does take such an event for things to change, and whether it's COVID, whether it's Grenfell, whether it's other things that happen at this moment in time, it starts to actually then enact meaningful change. And we're starting to see that now being really forced onto organisations and then into, as I said earlier, the supply chain.
Good. So while we're still talking about sort of standards and processes, as I mentioned before, PAS 1192 Part 6 is the last of the remaining BIM Level 2 guidance documents that still sit within the UK BIM framework. And we're being advised that obviously we're expecting a replacement for this into the 19650 series, potentially by the end of this year. So this is likely to incorporate a more global approach to improving structured health and safety information using technology and BIM deliverables, and is likely to have a UK portion to that, whether it's an annex that sits in the back of it that will also then readdress the UK CDM regulations of 2015. I would be very surprised if at that point maybe those regulations are also addressed and reviewed to include the requirements of information management processes and the golden thread as part of that delivery as well. We have a number of other sort of new documents and standards that have been released over the last year. One being ISO 19650 Part 4. This is providing a more holistic approach for the generation and exchange of information, with putting in place a lot of rules and criteria around controlling that information as part of that wider aspect. So we moved away from purely looking at the COBE bubble and the COBE understanding within the original BS 1192 Part 4 and expanding that to any type of information delivery and exchange that we have within the industry. We've also got the launch of something called Flex 1965. This is a fairly new document. It was updated in April this year, just a month or so ago. And it provides a bit of a framework or an understanding around how to deliver and specify the UK BIM framework deliverables, and shows ways of including things like security requirements, exchanging clear and unambiguous information across the projects. And actually this one is available free of charge from BSI, mainly to help clients and the industry as a whole understand how to specify the needs of information management and these processes to be able to standardise the outputs.
I think when we actually, sorry, Rich, if you're going to speak,
Yeah,
but just to come on to this, I think that in terms of when we start to then move into a sustainability conversation, I think it's important that sustainability is talked about, but actually what does it really mean? Whether it's the embodied carbon, the operational carbon that's actually created as a due to that project. Now, it was in the news last week that in terms of, well, it's quite high profile in the news last week, where we're actually starting to get very close to that threshold of 1.5 degrees, and we are going to actually, or we're forecasted to cross that within the next 5 years. Being as though construction is responsible for 39% of carbon emissions globally, it seems crazy that we're not starting to actually adopt some of these digital ways of working to actually start to have a moral obligation to actually enact this change. And I think that if we continue at this rate in terms of just ignoring the actual opportunity to transform the organisation, to transform workflows, then there's going to be a point where we just don't come back from. And that time will be probably in, I suppose in the next, whether it's in our generation or whether it's in our lifetime or it's next generation.
Quite possibly in our generation.
But it's really frustrating to see, because I know that it's talked about an awful lot. And again, going back to my experience of DCW last week, it was something that was talked about a lot and a hell of a lot. But to see some organisations that are not enacting this change, it can be a small thing. It can just be in terms of actually taking less clashes to site and have a byproduct of actually different materials arriving and not being used. The waste, all of that type of thing. There's a lot of things that can be said or can avoid or can help that sustainability conversation at the moment.
And actually, when we look at that, there are a number of government targets that are out there to get us towards that decarbonisation agenda from a UK government perspective. Interestingly, when you start to look at these, the 10-point green plan and the net zero strategy for 2050, a lot of them focus around, protecting the environment, improve sustainable production. But one of those key pieces for me was that investment in innovation to produce greener buildings. The only way we can do that is to manage the materials, the technology that we use to be able to generate that information, those buildings as a whole, and actually look at the wider targets around sustainable energy resourcing, maybe recycling and reusing of information, recycling and reusing materials from our buildings when they're demolished. And the best way that we can manage that process is about information around those buildings. So we need to consider that that wider aspect of long-term approach to both designing and constructing buildings, but the use of them as well. And when we actually deal with this from a BIM perspective or from a digitisation perspective, we're seeing the emergence of things like 7D modelling around embedding sustainability requirements into our modelling-based environments. And then we're also looking at factors around 9D modelling, where we're considering things like lean construction or an incorporation of resource management and continuous improvement of those buildings over the life cycle of each one of those assets. So each have their own delivery needs and timelines that are affecting the way that we manage and oversee those processes. But we're now seeing that these being embedded in the way that we design, construct and deliver those projects as a whole. Alongside that, we also have to consider the effects of the data we're producing. And one of the other core factors here is interoperability. The number of times that I've heard the term interoperability mentioned in the last year is unbelievable, and actually it's a massive agenda point, especially when you're dealing with the likes of Building Smart, being on the Building Smart panels and that kind of thing. That need for managing data that has longevity, that has an effect and a cost over the life cycle of an asset. We want to start to avoid these markers that we can see on screen on the left-hand side, where we're duplicating information, re-entering information, not being able to find the right information at the right time, or regenerating those pieces of information through having to transfer to different pieces of technology. If we can now start to address the interoperability piece about the data production through design, construction and operations, then we can start to look at the way that data is potentially used over the long-term life of those assets. Interestingly, there's a team within the government groups called the GIIG, the Government and Industry Interoperability Group, which is always a bit of a mouthful to say, have recently released in April this year a code of practice which outlines the key functions around interoperable data and how we should start to manage those systems and teams over the life cycle of an asset. So again, this one's available through, I believe, through the UK BIM framework guidance. The GIIG has recently joined up forces with the likes of NEMA and Building Smart to form almost like a trifecta group, which I will touch on at the end. One of the last points for me in terms of those influencing factors is the AI piece, or the automation and AI. For me, it's sort of a scary concept. It's become this big beast of a thing in the last, very short period of time, in my view, sort of probably in the last 3 to 6 months. And actually now, when we're talking to the likes of Autodesk and other design partners and those kind of things, we're finding that AI generative tools are being embedded in the things that we use now. We're starting to see those appear as part of that sort of the impact of the functions that are there. AI is going to be one of those disruptors in the construction industry. We know it's coming, and we know that it's going to have an impact. We're already seeing that it's starting to have an impact on some of the tools that we already use. When we look at simple things like Google launched Bard just a couple of weeks ago, that sort of text generation tool that can help teams or help individuals search and write pieces of text through just a simple set of questions. We can see that that's going to move in the direction of codification of processing, construction preparation, and simplifying some of the processes that we look at. We've also got things like Veras starting to creep into the market. Veras is one of these new AI visualization tools where you can draw simple concept sketches and ask it to create a futuristic landscape for the images that you want to create, and create multiple versions at a click of a button. We can see that these kind of bits of technology are going to start appearing within the likes of potentially Twinmotion that we looked at today, Revit, maybe even some things like Forma moving forward, where we want to start to look at that conceptual design piece and set in a set of rules that then can generate a vast array of different options appraisals or processes that we can then look at and appraise. My hope is that it will help to take some of the mundane out of the things that we do, take out those repetitive tasks from our projects. However, I think it's going to have a wider reaching impact on a variety of different construction sectors, of which some of them you can see here. I did a bit of research before this session, and these were sort of some of the high, medium and low risk potentials of where they're going to start to have impact. That AI piece is going to have impact on different areas of the industry. How long is it going to be till we see those AI tools embedded into the likes of Revit and AutoCAD? I really don't think it's going to be very long at all.
Not at all.
So sort of coming to the tail end of this, we're really starting to focus on the approach of digital competency and trying to bring all of those pieces together. From a client's point of view, they want to start looking at those digital technology needs, improve the way that they are managing and overseeing those assets through leveraging standardized processes, building in the need for things like digital twins, interoperability, even things like soft landings, can be incorporated as part of that whole life information management approach, which basically pushes together that capital development piece into operations and all the way back round again. It's essentially for us to embed this requirement as part of this industry upskilling, and if we get it right at the start from a client's perspective, the likelihood is that's going to then filter through the wider digital requirement. When we start to look at design and construction environment businesses, they historically have been very much at the forefront of the curve, addressing sort of digital expectations. However, we can't sit on our laurels. We have to make sure that although you may be at the head, you may have originally been at the head of the curve and then sat back. We've seen a number of organisations who have come to us and said, oh, well, we were all BIM level 2 compliant, and now we're being asked for a brand new set of requirements that we don't really fully understand. What can we do to improve the way that we're managing our business, improve those sort of project scoping, tendering processes, our delivery handovers, our programs, and actually, one of the things that comes up a lot now is business certification. A lot of design and construction houses are now looking to target business certification, which for me really brings us back to that piece around educating your staff. And then the last piece of that wider puzzle is the operational management team. It doesn't, that digital information piece doesn't stop with construction and design. It has to go full circle. So when we're starting to look at the digitally engaged process, the handover requirements into the maintenance sector, we should be starting with the end in mind. We should be knowing where we need to go to and having those teams incorporating the needs of their digital management processes, maybe their digital twins, their analytics, their management processes, and any of that sort of handover deliverable into the capital development program, and continue that cycle throughout any design process. So we need to think about that sort of data management and platform control over the information that's being produced to allow for the scalability and the longevity of that data over the life cycle of each one of those buildings that we work within. Coupled with that sort of interoperable data piece, to make sure that we're ensuring that that data can be accessed and reused and recycled over a period of years, will be a much more long-term approach to the way that we deliver those projects. So when we talk to organisations, it's very much we very much focus around this digital transformation. Right back to what I said at the start of this session. We need to be considering better ways of delivering all of our projects, not just the ones that require a BIM deliverable or those digital outputs. So we work with a lot of organisations looking at discovery and assessment processes, understanding the strategic needs of the business, start to setting in things like roadmaps, key performance indicators to make sure that they're moving teams in the right direction, and then building a digital enabled team like a steering committee or a digital design group to be able to control and manage that, but also disseminate the information across the business. It's not just about an individual or a small team of individuals to control that process. The more people we get involved, the more engagement you get, and the more understanding you have across the business, and the less risk that you're going to be exposed to. This can then be supported by things like business certification, but business certification shouldn't be looked at in its own bubble. Business certification has to be supported by the people that are delivering the projects. So alongside both of these pieces, and this is one thing that Phil spoke about earlier on today, and it's something that Man & Machine as a whole are very passionate about, is supporting organisations through that digital enhancement realm, to be able to improve the way that not only the business works with regard to processes and documentation and those kind of efficiencies that can be gained from managing data better, but also upskilling those teams so that they can leverage and use the technology and the information that is being produced. And then you get a little bit of assurance from a client's perspective that you're working with a team that has a good qualified set of individuals. So there's a number of benefits to employees and companies that, going through that digital competency piece. Phil talked about a lot of these earlier, but it really is about making sure that we're improving that skill set. We're evolving the current roles that we sit within our organisations, and it's not necessarily about inventing new fangled names for people within the business. Is actually changing the methods and the skill set that those teams already have. So when you may have the need for particular individuals being document controllers, but actually we are all information managers. We all manage and exchange information in one shape or another. So we need to look at those sort of more innovative business environments to ensure that we are engaging with this as part of a business initiative. And there's industry support out there. The likes of NEMA, GIIG, and Building Smart are out there to help provide guidance. Industry specialists out there to help move different parts of the business in the right direction. There's a wide variety of BIM4 groups and regional groups that can help with this process. And all of this is really centred on education again. Go and find out about what you can learn to improve the way that your organisation works. And needless to say, we're here too. So we're obviously platinum patrons of NEMA. We're Building Smart professional certification providers. We're associate consultants as part of BSI, and we also support businesses in that digital transformation piece. So we need to make sure that we're kind of getting towards the end of our summit environment, and for me, you've probably spent, if you've been here for the whole day, then congratulations, you've made it to the end. But essentially what you've done is you've utilised your time to learn something new. You've spent your time listening to different team members that we have at Man & Machine to help you realise what what new things are out there that you can go and learn and absorb and include as part of your business deliverables. So on that note, I'm going to kind of hand over back to Nathan to finish off this session.
No, absolutely, and thank you, Rich. And I think that it's really important that what Rich just mentioned there in terms of just like awareness and education, that's what we kind of, that's our mantra in terms of actually upskilling teams, upskilling our customers, giving them exposure to different ways of working to try and make a meaningful change in our organisation. And I think how we do that is really important. Now, there's many ways in which we can support you. Clearly, we've spoken a lot about digital change and a lot of pressures that are going on. Now, a lot of this is actually is going to be relevant to you if your clients are asking for it. However, as we've just spoken about, whether it's being mandated by a client, there is always an opportunity in your workflow to drive some meaningful change. And there's probably a lot of processes that have been put in place that have been that way for quite a while, for a number of years, that ultimately just slow you down. And I think that whilst sometimes that we talk about technology and it does require an investment, not in terms of just financially to purchase the software or to buy the software, but to then actually train the team how to use it, it will then actually support you and help you. And we can help you as much or as little as you want. Whether that actually comes down to actually basic training or look at more from a process point of view as well with our Been Ready services, we can support you, we can help you, whatever it is that you're after, we can certainly help. I think when you actually start to specifically look at that in isolation with our Been Ready services, so I am going to tie it back into, say, client demand and actually a requirement for ISO 19650 processes, we can start to support you no matter where you are in your journey. Whether that's from a coordination and collaboration point of view, looking at your project CDE, or your data management tools, taking it over to digital management certification. It can be very much elementary courses and getting that understanding across that wider organisation, or actually starting to hone in on more specialist training that can be about information delivery, or actually looking at the individual certification. Typically then starts to go into other areas such as like your modelling, your native authoring tools, and then as Richard just rightly said, actually trying to help you create that plan and that timeline of where you're trying to get to. The one thing that I would kind of like to finish up on is actually just talking about specifically the steps that we take when we approach an organisation that has probably seen something or has got a challenge that they've seen or we've talked about within this presentation. We follow quite a tried and tested approach in terms of actually making it a success, because I've spoken about it on a few other sessions today. I think I mentioned it in the keynote, and I'm sure either Richard or I probably at some point alluded to it today, is that actually when you start to make a change within the organisation, you need to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you will try to adopt or try to push different processes or ways of working into the organisation or across the team, and ultimately they will just be ignored. It's important that you get support or you create I'm going to call it a digital working group, not a, I was going to say the word BIM steering group. I'll call it a digital working group, and creating a team that's not just within the design function of the organisation, but actually looking at, say, your commercial teams, director support, and having that organisational and that holistic approach to drive that change. Educating them is key. I appreciate there's going to be people within the organisation that do already know some of the things that we've mentioned, some of the standards, and actually adopting those and working with them. But to actually start to enact some of the change, you are going to have to get some elementary understanding into the organisation, into those individuals. And that can then start to be like workshops. We tend to offer a BIM Fundamentals course, a one-day workshop where we talk to you a very, I suppose it's a broad overview in terms of actually what it means. Then comes an assessment, or actually starting to put together your plan. You can do that if you feel confident, or we can support you doing that. And then we start to go through the different chains, looking at your policy documents, your digital strategy, how you're actually going to be working on, or how you're going to say to your clients that you're going to actually deliver these projects. Then when the project documentation comes, looking at things like your CAD standards, BEPs, EIRs, whatever it may be, actually setting up and having that documentation in place so people can follow it. It's not just about proving to a client that you can deliver it, it's actually then showing to your colleagues, to your employees, that we have these ways of working, and you can actually start to standardise it. Following on from that is probably the last piece. You normally think that it might be the first, but actually looking at technology, looking at the software that you're using. That can be from a data management point of view, collaboration piece. It can just be actually producing 3D models with the right information and data behind those. And that's typically the approach that we take. That's the tried and tested approach. It typically can take anything between, I wouldn't say 6 months, but more so to a year to 18 months. We tend to see it. It can take longer if you don't get that support at the start. And that's why we really say that unless your organisation is serious about the change, then it can just slow you down when you start to go through these different elements. And I think that takes us near enough to the end of our session this afternoon.